Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESBC community webinar. Today, I'm joined by Ben Thomas, who will cover SOC in an hour. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESBC_community, and our hashtag is hashtag ESBC24. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next Azure Week webinar. Azure AI Studio / OpenAI offerings with Alec Harrison. This webinar will take place this evening, Tuesday, the 16th of July, 2024, at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. CEST. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Join us for exclusive opportunity at hashtag FabConEurope with our super early bird sale. Act now and secure a ticket before Friday, July 19th to unlock incredible savings of up to €700. Don't delay, register today to reserve your place and take advantage of this limited time offer. Book your tickets today at www.sharepointeurope.com/European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. Early bird sale alert for hashtag ESBC24. Dive deep into the latest governance, Azure, SharePoint, Copilot, Microsoft Teams, Viva Topics, API, AI, Microsoft Entra, Power Automate, Microsoft Purview, and more. Don't miss out. Register your interest today at www.sharepointeurope.com/pricing. After this webinar, we'll have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Ben. Hello, Ben. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for that intro. Just kick it off by sharing the screen. Hopefully that'll go through.
I can see SOC in an hour.
Brilliant. Well, welcome everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name's Ben Thomas, and we'll run through Security Operations Center in an hour. I appreciate that there should be an "and" there instead of an hour, but we'll get right into it. First of all, just a little agenda. Who am I? SEMSOR in the general kind of definition, Microsoft Sentinel, which is going to be the purely focus here. We'll jump into a demo and we'll wrap up with a summary. So first of all, who am I? So currently I am a senior security consultant at Insight. My day-to-day activities are consulting with clients, completed delivery being that technical escalation point on projects, technical lead, man of many hats in some cases, but definitely a security focus, and predominantly my strongest skill set is Azure. Coming from the Azure team, that would make sense. Been doing this around 17 years now, which feels like a long time, and there's probably a few more years to go. But yeah, definitely. Seen a few things, probably not seen everything, but who knows? Who knows? I started out on level 1 help desk, answering the phones, resetting passwords. Have you turned it off? Have you turned it back on again? Those kind of questions. All the way through to third line, consulted for myself, had my own business for a while, and landed at Insight. Ultimately, continuing that skill set. Massive tech fan. You know, I've got a job that comes as a hobby as well, which sometimes is a little unfortunate because 15-hour days in front of a computer is very easily done. But yeah, I like to break out with music and films as well. So before we dig into it, they've got a very interesting number that I want you to look at. So 73%, what could that possibly mean? And I'm going to tell you in a second. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. What could that mean? So I'm going to tell you now, and hopefully you've had enough time to consider what that could potentially be. So the figure that I'm quoting here, 73% of large businesses report to not have a formal incident response plan. Now, I find that interesting, purely from the fact of the matter is that we can't go days sometimes without an announcement about somebody being hacked or breached. I think if you're up with the recent news that we've heard about Disney, 1.1 terabytes of data from the Slack messages, content, APIs, the whole 9 yards. That's going to be an interesting one to follow. And just days before, AT&T, another breach, a lot of data going missing, customers, millions of customers affected. And yeah, it's almost coming to the point where we're almost desensitized to it because we're hearing it that often. And just so you know where I got this stat, so the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology did a survey, and that's where that statistic come from. And it's quite an interesting read if you go on the gov.uk website. So you're probably thinking, well, why is that statistic relevant then? You know, what does that mean? Why incident response? Why then talk about Siemens? So how can you respond to an incident if you don't know that it's gone on? Tools like Microsoft Sentinel will help with that visibility. So let's find out what SIEM and SOA means before diving into Microsoft Sentinel. What is it? Why and when you would use it? We'll run through these points and hopefully fill in some gaps. If you already know, brilliant, you're already on your way. SIEM, by its own definition, is security, incidents, and event management. Ultimately, anything that generates a log or an event, ingesting it into a central location to then use at a later date and apply some analytics to it. You know, Windows event logs, typically security events, we can include more, but security will give you the majority of it. When someone logged on, when someone's logged off, how many attempts has that user logged on or attempted to log on and then been locked out? So these are the events that we typically see and want to ingest. Now, it's not just security events. We can expand that to just general audit logs, sign-in logs. We can look at firewall logs. I mean, anything that generates a log, we can put in it. But the question is, and always should be the number one question, is it going to give me any useful information? Because if the answer is no, why ingest it? Yes, it might enrich something a little bit, which may be a consideration. But definitely, you know, I don't want to know if a printer has spilled a job. I mean, unless that printer's been hacked. But I mean, how many times do you hear about that? Just turn it off. And then SOA is security orchestration, automation, and response. So it's all good and well ingesting that information into a central point and using it, but you're going to want to know when something happens. You know, you don't want to sit there, have an alert generated, and then watch it tick by. You know, you want to do something with that, whether that's notify someone, do some form of automation to triage it, or block a user signing in, or reset a password. You know, the list is probably limited to your own imagination. Why would we use a solution like this? So it consolidates everything into a single location. You know, there are other technologies out there. Whilst I'm focusing on Microsoft Sentinel, everyone's probably heard of Splunk as one of the longest standing platforms, certainly for this particular focus. And it's more than just Windows devices as well. You know, as much as I'm going to focus on the Microsoft stack in the demo coming up, it's like I say, it's very much more than that. We look at network devices, firewalls, switching, whatever's relevant and potentially will highlight an incident, something going on, suspicious activity. Storage devices, you name it, you can probably get it in there in terms of a log source and use its information where relevant. But just reinforcing that point, only bring what makes sense, what you need to see to triage and look into your infrastructure. So I think the main point is that obviously advantage of multiple log sources coming into a central location. It allows security teams or just general users, IT guys, to minimize the amount of gaps of visibility that ultimately you can see what's going on in the environment. We all know that sometimes cyber attacks and exploits are multi-step, and certainly probably some of the more recent attacks, certainly the Disney one, I'd be interested to see how that's occurred, and it probably will be a multi-step attack. And typically, I think we all know where it kind of stems from. Phishing is usually the common instigator, so to speak. And I think we've all kind of experienced or heard of, business email compromise. Someone's clicked a dodgy link. It's then taken to a false sign-in page. They've put the credentials in. It's not necessarily worked, but at that point, we, us techies know that it's too late. And moving on to when would you use this? I mean, I'm going to be an advocate and say anytime, anyone, anywhere. Typically, compliance reasons, vendor or partner requirements, enterprise scale, where you just haven't got that manpower to see and look into that and manage things on it as if you would on a smaller scale. And also GRC requirements, so new frameworks coming in like NIS2. There's a requirement where you need to be able to report a breach within a defined period of time, and ultimately that is going to drive adoption of tools like SIEM and SOC, just to be able to give that advantage of being able to respond to a compliance framework. Now, it's all good and well saying, oh, you need to respond within 24 hours or 48 hours, whatever the framework dictates. If you make a reasonable effort, that should be the majority. It's better than not making an effort, let's put it that way. It's going to be interesting to see how certain frameworks enforce that incident response piece. But I think it just feeds into that large companies announcing that they have been breached very quickly. And it can feed into the image as well, public image. Someone acknowledging that they've been breached or covering it up. I think honesty is always the best policy. Certainly what I teach my kids. So who knows? Let's see where that goes. But like I said, there are multiple tools, but we're going to focus on Microsoft Sentinel, just purely because that's what I know. That's what I can at least demo and show you here today. And it's really simple, really is. I mean, if I can do it, we must be onto a winner. So Microsoft Sentinel actually is not an aged product like Splunk, released in 2019. Some people might say that's relatively new. I'd probably say it's on its way to maturity. It's certainly a contender from what I've seen. From designing and implementing it, I really like it. I enjoy it. I do enjoy the Azure stack as well, so it's very easy for me to say that. It's natively available on Azure, which means that you need an Azure environment to consume it. The beauty of it being natively available, it sits on a log analytics workspace and use logic apps to extend its capability. So any native service, you probably can get data in or out of it one way or another. If you wanted to use this as you could almost use Sentinel as an intermediary service to then pass on to something else. So there is ways and means of ingesting data into Sentinel and then sending it elsewhere. Quite an advanced topic probably for this particular webinar, but there are ways and means, and if anyone is interested, look at exporting Sentinel data via event hubs, which, do you know what, I might show you just where the settings are. We won't necessarily have anything to export it to today, but yeah, you can be used as a primary, intermediary, or even you can have multiple instances across Azure in one tenant. Another feature that I like to call out, there is something that's going to potentially supersede this, or rely on this, should I say, Azure Lighthouse. If you're not sure what that is, that's the capability of delegating permissions to another company or set of individuals within your environment, and then you're able to then use RBAC roles to secure those identities so people can do what they need to do and only what they need to do. The brilliance of this is that it applies to, you know, if you're an MSP or an MSSP, or even if you're doing an M&A, you're a company buying another company, Azure Lighthouse has more than just an application than Sentinel. It expands far past that across the entire Azure platform. So if you're in a scenario where you're looking at guest accounts in other tenants, definitely explore Azure Lighthouse to bring your own identity and manage that IAM process centrally. Makes things a lot easier. Also works nice with licensing as well, and another few other things. So if you haven't heard of it or used it and you've kind of heard some of them scenarios, there's some reading there for you to look up and see how we could use that. Almost obvious kind of point here to make, but integrates well with the other Defender products. I think it'd be really difficult to say that Azure Sentinel, Microsoft Sentinel even, is great if it didn't, but yeah, really works well with the other platforms. And you may have heard of a term called Defender XDR, so that extended detection and response, which won't necessarily be covered in this, but we'll loosely allude to it when it comes to the connectors and what other things we can do. But yeah, the data connector for XDR takes multiple sources, so Defender for Cloud, cloud apps, endpoint, servers, you name it, combines it and then puts it under one connector. So certainly for E5 customers, definitely worthwhile exploring from a cost perspective. Not only that, it just enriches everything and you get a really good set of logs once everything's set up from the Defender suite over into Sentinel. It's comparable to other competitors like Splunk. So yeah, I'm not going to here to pitch it. I'm just trying to make the point that it is worthwhile a look. And it's really quite simple as well. This is the context of it. There's no like, it works on log analytics. If you can get data into a log analytics workspace, you're done. So that concept, again, you know, we use data connectors to do that within Sentinel, but we can do data collection rules, we can do custom log sources. There's a whole 9 yards. And like I say, if you want to use Azure Monitor and pipe security event logs via DCR into it, you can do. You know, if you want to create a DCR endpoint and ingest custom logs, you can do. So as long as it lands in that log analytics workspace that we applied on, possibilities are endless. And you can even script stuff into log analytics. So like I say, you've really got some heavy options to really use it to what you need it to. Going on to the next slide, we'll just outline a few points before we dive into the demo, because I'm quite keen just to complete the demo, give myself as much time as possible, because, you know, live demos are always great. But we'll do a bit of a knowledge check. So I'm going to assume that you have some fundamental knowledge around Azure, Entra, M365 workloads. I may reference some on-premise technologies. So the topics that we're going to cover are going to be brief, but the general idea is that you get a really good overview of Microsoft Sentinel in its entirety. I think it's important as well, before we start the demo, to define SOC, so Security Operations Center. whilst I've alluded to that earlier on in this presentation, it's also really quite important to kind of let's define that out now. So a SOC can be anything, you know, in reality. It can be one person, or it could be large enterprise scale that Microsoft manage. You know, we anywhere in between. Ultimately, we're talking about a very specific function that looks at security and its related items. We're just defining it as a product at the moment. Microsoft Sentinel, you know, that's a tool we're going to use to build our SOC on. So bigger concept to explore there. So some objectives. So what I want to achieve, or certainly highlight to yourselves, is how we deploy Sentinel. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. If you've used Azure, we can really work through that. If you haven't used Azure before, well, we'll run through that. The concept is very similar to other cloud providers as well, how you would provision resources. Obviously, each have their own nuances. We're then going to look at enabling data connectors. This is ultimately how we get data into the product. Now, as I've said, we can take that from multiple sources, but we'll use the ones where we can get data in quickly, basically, just so we can see some action going on. We'll look at the analytical rules, and this is ultimately where, when data meets a particular criteria, we want it to do something, whether that's an alert, run some automation, whatever. But that's the basis of it. We're actively looking at that data to say, that's not quite right. We need to do something about that, whether that's generate an incident or run some automation. We'll look at creating a custom rule as well using KQL. So KQL is a language that's used natively across Azure. Very similar, and I'm going to say similar, I'm not going to say the same, very similar to SQL, quite selective. You want to look at tables, and you can still do unions and joins and stuff like that. And by all means, I'm not going to profess that I am very good at KQL. I am still very much learning that. My background as a techie didn't really expose me to any kind of SQL or manipulation of data using language. So you'll see some basic stuff. I'm not gonna, like I say, I'm not gonna do anything wacky. We're gonna look at the automation capabilities within Sentinel. So what can we do to get the system to do some work for us to try and minimize effort required to troubleshoot these things? And I think that's also a piece where I'm gonna highlight a particular example. You know, if you're quite knowledgeable in logic apps, that's going to really help here. Or if you know somebody, if there's somebody within your team that can work stuff out, 100% logic apps will take that automation piece and be able to really drive home some really interesting solutions. And there are some really interesting solutions out there. We're going to attempt, and whilst I've been prepping for this webinar, we're going to generate some alerts. And hopefully I've picked some really quick scenarios where we can see those. We're going to try and generate them, but then we're also probably going to have to step away for a moment to allow the data to ingest. Whilst we step away from that, whilst we let Sentinel do its thing, we'll run through some settings that I really need to feel like I call out to yourselves. And this is just to highlight, yes, we can just set it up, but there are other considerations, typically when it comes to cost and optimization, where the settings will make sense when we get to it. And managing it, it's not one of those things that you can just turn on and forget about. It does need some maintenance, because you might be able to turn one thing on and you might get to the end of the month and have a very large bill, which then comes back to the whole point of making sure that you only bring what you need. After those settings, enough time should have passed where we start seeing alerts and the information being generated within Sentinel before rounding off the demo on some other notable features, which we'll run through very briefly, but we'll be there for some additional learning. So with that being said, let's do it. So you're going to have to give me a second whilst I get things set up. Drag this window to here. Everyone should be able to see that. So if you don't know, this is the Azure portal, and like everything, we're going to start with probably a resource group, and you don't necessarily have to do it this way. It's really just to kind of show the just the thought process, and I'm not saying that this would be the way that I would do it. I'd also look at ways of using infrastructure as code to develop this, to speed this up. Certainly if you're doing it multiple times for a customer or multiple environments, I would look at the ways where Bicep and Terraform you could use to push this, you know, from a IAC perspective. So we're just going to set up a resource group where we can bang resources into. We're going to obviously pick any kind of region. UK South, it just happens to be one of the regions nearby. If you're not using a tagging policy or you don't use tags 100%, I would recommend looking into that, and that's just me from my coming from my Azure days for insight. Very useful moving forward when looking at billing or any kind of reporting across Azure. So we've created our resource group. We can see that it's there, nice and empty. And we could just click Sentinel here and click create, and then it would ask us to create a new workspace. We can do that, or if you've got an existing log analytics workspace, you can also use that. So I'll show you how we do it if you've already got a log analytics workspace. So we're just going to jump in here, select our existing resource group. We're then going to give ourselves a little name. Now, naming conventions, that's a whole other subject in itself. It really does depend. It has to work for you. Yes, there are recommendations on how you name things. Obviously, for the purposes of the demo, I'm just going to stick to what I use and what I recognize personally. So as that's deploying, we're hitting that log analytics workspace. It's just spinning up behind the scenes. Wait for that to deploy. Don't take too long. There we go. Brilliant. So that's deployed. We can flick back to the main menu. And I am going quite quickly because I am cautious that enabling the data connectors and trying to get some alerts done, we've not got a lot of time, so we just need to crack on. So hopefully you can get to watch this back and pause and start and not see me click at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But this is just building the foundation, so there's plenty of resources out there to help you build this. So there we are. You can see that probably within a matter of a couple of minutes, I've provisioned a log analytics workspace. I've applied Sentinel on top. And what we're going to do now is look at some of the connectors. We'll run through some of the tabs in a moment, but let's get that data in there so I can at least show you how alerts and incidents are generated. So from the Content Hub, I know there's absolutely, well, you can see 632 results here at the bottom. Now, that's not all data connectors. There are some other solutions in there, workbooks, analytics. Like I say, it's quite substantial. So, like I say, I'd always refer back to the Microsoft Learn articles about what data connectors are there. If there's not connectors available, there are things called codeless connectors and, like I say, other ways of getting data in there. But for all intents and purposes for this demo, we're going to look at the Microsoft 365 connector, which is just here. So we can see the provider's Microsoft, support is provided by Microsoft, and we've got a current version. You can read about the connector here on the side, tells you how it does its thing. As well as downloading this connector, it's a solution. So we've got 15 analytical rules, we've got 1 data connector, we've got 21 hunting queries, and we've got 3 workbooks that will be installed as part of this connector. So install, that's it. That's all we need to do this very moment to at least get the connector installed, and obviously that associated content. We've hit install within a couple of minutes or a minute, depending how quickly as yours running today. We'll get a notification that's complete. So whilst we wait for that, there we go, successfully installed. Also, we're going to use Entra ID for some of our resources and demo today. So same process again. Tick the box, pops open the side menu, 63 analytical rules, data connectors, playbooks, and workbooks. Install. Let it go. Now, at this point, what's probably useful to call out once that's finished installing, I can show you a way where if you don't necessarily want to take Sentinel, but you want to export your sign-in and audit logs, we can certainly do that. And the reason why I'm waiting for it to install is so you got something to look at. We can head over into Entra. This is just the standard overview page. But if you wanted to just pipe your logs normally to a log analytics workspace, we can hit under the monitoring and health tab, look at the diagnostic setting. Whilst it's not fully populated yet, because it's still going across Azure, we see our log analytics workspace here. If you didn't want to do that and you already had an existing one, hit diagnostic setting. We can start ticking the boxes, select your subscription, off you go. Handy tip for you there. Like I say, you don't necessarily need to apply Sentinel to export this, but be wary that there may be additional costs. And that's one thing that obviously I don't wish for everyone to get a super high bill off the back of this webinar because they've enabled something. Always check out how much it's going to cost you, definitely. I say, so we've installed 2 solutions, and we're going to look at the data connectors and how we get them connected up. So if we scroll down, you can see here data connectors. We've only got 2 in the list. They're currently grayed out, and we can see that that's reflected by 0 connected. Selecting one in the middle pane will pop out the right-hand pane here. We'll give you a brief description. Also, last log received. It gives you a nice diagram of when it is connected. You will see data coming in there. And also the data types that it looks at. So at the moment, we can see SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams activity. If we open the connector page, it checks that I meet the prerequisites. So I've got read and write permissions. I've got global administrator or security administrator. Now, if you use PIM, obviously make sure that you PIM up to the appropriate permissions. If you haven't got that, it will give you a red X. And for the purpose of this, we're going to select all. Apply the changes. Success. So that's one data connector connected. We're then going to jump into Entra, enable this connector as well. It checks the prerequisites that I've got permissions. And now at this point, it calls out, you know, in order to export our data, we need that P1 or P2 license. So I happen to have the P2 license. And for the purpose of this demo, we're just interested in sign-in logs and audit logs. You can see that these other sources are currently in preview. I think with the recent announcement of the Entra Suite GA, these may change in time. But for the moment, like I say, I'm only interested in sign-in logs and audit logs. Hit apply again. Success. We flick back to data connectors. Now you will notice that there is a bit of a delay sometimes. So as much as we are connected, we're yet to ingest any information, and it's the same for the Entra. It's yet to fully pick up that we've connected that data connector, but that's fine. For the purpose of the demo, we can move on to the next thing, which is when we look at the analytical rules. For those who are keeping up, I know I am going at quite a fast pace, but when we enable these or install these connectors, they come with some additional analytical rules. Now, where would you get them? So just below the data connectors, there's the analytics section. You can see that we've got one rule enabled that always kind of pops along, and you can see there's quite a multifaceted kind of rule, but that's not necessarily what we're interested in right now. So let's look at the rule templates. So we've got 90 currently in the templated pack. Now you can add to these, you can write your own, you can use others as baselines. So really you are you're at your own free will, really. What do you want to look for? I think ones that probably we won't cover now, but let's call out whilst I can see them. Malicious inbox rule. I think we've all seen that business email compromise where we've seen things go to certain places, rules get deleted or moved to another folder, hidden. You know, we can look at that, and ultimately it's KQL. You know, we're looking at all those activity logs, and we can see, look, fatal, hijacked, all the common ones. Do not open, do not click. That's what we're looking for, and that's within those M365 logs that we're looking for. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to pick one. So we are going to pick attempts to sign into a disabled account. And when we expand this bar, it gives us a brief description. Identifies failed attempts to sign into disabled accounts across multiple Azure applications. So perfect, you know. It tells us the sources that we need. So I know that we need sign-in logs and audit logs. Obviously, all the other ones are connected. That's brought part of the connector. It maps it to a MITRE attack tactic, which is marked as initial access and then valid accounts. So if you're using the MITRE attack framework, you can really kind of dive in and start mapping this out, and you'll see why this is important later on. It gives us the rule query, which is the default one provided just as part of the connector and the associated content. It gives us a run frequency, a rule period, rule threshold, event grouping, suppression. Do we create incidents from it? Do we group them? And a version. I'm happy with all that, but I want to create it. I want to add it into my Sentinel workspace. So I'm going to leave everything default here. And this is just typically name, description, what we've seen, severity. Now, if you wanted to say, well, I don't want to treat it as a medium, I want it as a high, I want it as low, I want it as informational, that's up to you. This is just a recommendation, what comes with it. And there's that MITRE attack framework again. If you feel that you want to tag it with other tactics, fill your boots. You know, we've got options here. Status enabled. Obviously, we want to run against it. Now, not going to dive too much into this. It's KQL. That's how we're going to interrogate the logs to see how many times this has been generated. The one thing I am going to do is tweak it just for the purpose of the demo, just so we can see see the alert come through. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you need to run everything every 5 minutes to look at the last 5 minutes. This is just purposely done to capture the information within real time so we can highlight it within the demo. Incident settings, if you wanted to, we could tweak this. For the purpose of the demo, we're leaving it default. Automated response, this is where you can apply logic apps and playbooks to address things. At the moment, we're going to leave it as default. We're going to sit there and wait for it to validate. So if you've got any Azure policy, that's what it's checking at that point. It's all passed. We can hit save. It's going to enable that analytical rule. And we can see that it's enabled there for us. Now, there's another tab here for anomalies. So we'll come into it a little later on, but the user behavior, enriching those logs, using machine learning, which is another feature of Sentinel. That's where these anomalies, rule types, templates come into their own at this point. I mentioned in the demo we was gonna just at the start of the objectives, we're gonna create our own as well. Now, for the purpose of this, I've already prepared the KQL, but I'm going to give you an example that you can use, and by all means, if you want to It's not pinching the KQL. There's probably somebody else who's done it. It's just to really highlight that you can create your own. So I'm going to make an NRT query rule, which is a near real-time query. So it runs as fast as possible. If you noticed on the default, on the scheduled query rule, it runs every 5 minutes. That's probably the smallest. I think we can turn that down a little bit, but near real-time is runs as quickly as possible. So my rule for this is I'm gonna monitor an entry group. I want to know when somebody is added to my super secret group, and that's really quite descriptive, really original and innovative. Probably not, but like you see, we can just feed this in. So popping in the details, I'm going to select a MITRE attack framework tactic as well. Just purely for I should search for the actual code. There we go. Valid accounts enabled, rule logic. So we've got that where that was populated for us before. It's now blank. So in comes copy and paste. And you can see there I'm looking at certain columns within a table and filtering it down, extending some of the values so we can then project it. I'm going to do some entity mapping just so we can see that pop along into the actual alert. Second, full name, operator, populate these fields. Now what I'm actually doing is that within this, we can see that I projected a couple of variables here. Now they're available as in an entity, and whilst not necessarily making sense at the moment, it will all become apparent shortly when we generate the alert. It just allows us to, got that the wrong way around. It just allows us to enrich that alert a little bit more. I want to trigger an alert for each event. Now this is up to you. You can group all events into a single one. So if it happens multiple times within the defined period, it'll be one, or you can have one for each alert. Like I say, it's up to you. Default settings for the rest of these. We've passed it. We're going to save it. Brilliant. So we've got a couple of rules now. Going to move on to the automation piece. So down onto this tab. I can appreciate the pace might be quite quick, but we've got quite a lot to cover, just so we can get some stuff in there. So what I can actually do here from an automation point of view, I want to make things a little easier. I want to assign it to a particular set of analysts. I want to do a few different things. So what we can do is we can create an automation rule. As an example, we can give it a name, XYZ if we wanted to. When an incident is created, we can really filter it down, but we can run a playbook, assign an owner, look at L1 analysts, for example, and apply it. That's one way of doing it, but I want a little more flexibility. I want to be able not only to assign it to them, but I want to generate an alert as well. I want to send an email basically to say, you guys, you need to look at and triage this. So with that, we can use that automation rule if we wanted to assign it to them, but I want to do a little bit more. So let's do playbook with incident trigger. Once again, this is going to be based on a logic app, so we need to tell Azure where we want to put these things. A lot of these are already pre-populated. You can split it up however it suits your environment. We're going to give a brief playbook name. So let's see. Copy and paste this name. Just cautious of time. Want to get everything in. We're not necessarily going to enable diagnostics yet. We're going to connect it to Sentinel. Now I'm probably going to have to grant it permissions as well. We can do that within the logic app as well, but there is a place in Sentinel that I can show you in the settings that will do it. Identity, role assignments. Now I would fully recommend to go and explore the appropriate roles to ensure that this minimizes it only uses the exact permission that it requires. Yes, this is over provisioned. For the speed and purpose of the demo, we've got contributor rights for it. Please don't hang me on that because I do know that's over provision for what we need. So we're going to edit it. We can see we've already got our trigger here. Let's, for anyone who hasn't built Logic Apps or use Power Automate, we can just drag and drop. If you know what you're searching for, we can do variables, we can do connectors, we can do triggers and actions. So we're going to enter our variable name as group ID. It's going to be a string. And I've already got group ID here. Like I say, this is just showing how we can leverage some of these features for that SOC platform. So the next thing I need to do, Sentinel, I need to add update. So let's see more. We need to add update incident action. So I'm going to use some dynamic values that are already available to us. So we're going to look at the original trigger and we're going to look at the ID. We're going to add some tags. So tag 1, we want it to be L1, for example. We want the L1 guys to pick it up initially so we can filter it. And then we're going to tag it with triage. I'm going to assign an owner. And this is where our variable comes in handy because I can just click that. We're going to leave the severity. We're going to change the status to active because we're going to tell someone that it's working. And that's it for that particular one. We're then going to search for, I want an email alert. And my awful spelling there. I'm going to create a connection. Yes, I'm just going to authorize it with my account. You know, you could potentially put a service account in there to try and enable that. But for all intents and purposes, I have suitable permissions to complete that. I'm going to put my pre-made email address in there. I'm going to get my subject title. And where it says dynamic value, I'm going to take that out. I'm going to actually get the incident title from the initial trigger. Then I'm going to put a little message in for my analysts. Level 1 analyst, new ticket is coming, waiting to be triaged. Please respond ASAP. I am going to put some advanced parameters in because I want to send it from a particular email address. Now this account has got access to send from that. Very important. I'm going to change the importance to high as well. On that point, I'm going to save it. I appreciate that I've run through this really quickly, but we're going to generate some alerts now. And I'm going to do this off screen just so we can keep things moving. So bear with me one moment. So at this point, whilst you can't see, I have an account that's disabled. I'm going to attempt to sign into it numerous times. Now that is, the account's disabled. I've got the correct password, but obviously the account's disabled. For the eagle eye people on the webinar, you'll have seen that the threshold was 3 attempts. So I've just done 4. You haven't seen that, but also I want to make sure that my super secret group, nobody gets added to it. So if we just search for my super secret group, when I can spell, here it is. We can see that there's already there's no members in it. There's 1 owner. Now this might be overkill. We've already got a couple of people in there, sorry. We're just going to search through, find someone random. Henrietta, she shouldn't be in this group, but we're going to add her anyway. So she'll appear there shortly. Now, whilst we wait for those alerts to come through, I appreciate this has been whistle stop. Let's run through some of those settings because we'll give it some time to generate. Now, you can't just see because the bar was hiding it. When you provision Sentinel Workspace, obviously it's on Azure Log Analytics. 9 times out of 10, you'll hit this page you go tier. If you find that, or if you provision this and over the course of the day, you're hitting regularly over 100 gig, it might be worthwhile to change your pricing tier to commit to it. So it'll impact, obviously, give you a bit of a discount for committing to that. But very much, if you do deploy this, please, 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 please keep an eye on your logs and how much you're ingesting. It'll give you a really nice overview here once you start ingesting that data. But yeah, definitely keep an eye on it. Other things to call out: settings. So if you want to enable that machine learning about user behavior, this is where you'd set it up. Little out of scope for this kind of for this current webinar. Workspace Manager, that's coming in while still in preview. Definitely one to look at. Those playbook permissions, I manually did it on the managed identity, but you can use it here. I would recommend doing it this way. And audit health monitoring. Like I say, if you want to see what's going on, if Sentinel's running as it should, enable it, puts an extra couple of tables into the Log Analytics workspace so you can query that. If you want to remove Sentinel from your Log Analytics workspace, this is where you'd also do it. There's a few things that you have to do, and it calls it out here. Obviously, if you want to fill in the feedback. If we click Workspace Settings, this takes us to the Log Analytics workspace. I think there's a few things here that I'd like to call out just purely from this perspective. You can look at the tables. So you can see there that once we provision Sentinel, it's provisioned quite several default ones that you may or may not use. It will highlight the workspace retention of interactive retention and total retention. And you can, if you really wanted to, use sign-in logs as an example. We can click the three dots, manage the table. So we can do interactive and then total retention period, it matches. But if you drop down this icon and do 60, you can see that actually now you get a total of 90 days, 60 days. You get 30 in the archive and 30 in the active. If you were to hit save, that would keep stuff in that table longer than you needed. I mentioned briefly earlier about data export. This is where you do it, and you can quite see here, storage account or event hub. If you've got a use case, this is where you'd be. So let's see if we've got any alerts yet. It might be running a little too fast and running out of time, unfortunately. Whilst we wait for those alerts to generate, or fingers crossed, let's run through some other things as well. So workbooks, this is where you can visualize your data, and we've got a few templates there. If you're familiar with Azure Monitor, very similar again. You can make your own. You can use the content hub to bring in more, like I say, whatever meets your needs. Hunting, rather than being reactive to alerts coming in, we can go look for things. We saw that there was queries that already come in with the data connectors, and you can use them. Content hub as well, if you need more. The MITRE ATT&CK framework, I told you this was going to come in, but it maps all the tactics and then how many rules you've got in place under each tactic and what it covers. Super useful if you use this internally. SOC optimization, relatively new feature. I say relatively new, probably a couple of months old now. It gives you ways and means of improving and optimizing your response to certain things. You can see what's completed, what's dismissed, and cover what you need. Couple more things: repositories, either GitHub or Azure DevOps. So if you've got KQL or workbooks or anything stored in there, we can connect them and start deploying into that. Like I say, super useful as part of that continuous improvement, continuous deployment kind of scenarios. And whilst I've not necessarily used this in any of the examples, watch lists. Watch lists are super useful to try and speed up when you've got queries and you want to query some internal IPs and filter out alerts that might have internal IPs or internal users or include internal users. Watch lists are a super useful way of doing that. They're stored within the log analytics workspace itself, and what that basically gives you is solutions that are quite performant and low latency, so your queries should run faster. And that's about it, really. I'm cautious of time, and we still know alerts, which is a bit of a buzzkill. But probably back to, should we take some questions now, if there is any?
Yeah. Yeah, we can take some questions.
We've got one. I've got an alert.
Yeah.
As I cut to questions, let's do questions and we can come back to the alert, because I'm cautious people might have some
Perfect.
burning.
So what measures are in place to ensure data privacy and security within Microsoft Sentinel?
RBAC. So whilst I probably didn't give it enough justice, there are different RBAC roles. So certainly within an internal mechanism, your privacy can be controlled just using the standard RBAC model. I'd be interested to know a little more context to the question, just so I can provide a better answer. But certainly my initial go-to response would be heavily using the built-in RBAC roles.
Perfect. Do you want another question, or?
Yeah, let's keep going with the questions, because obviously I want to make sure that we answer a few, because I know that I've been very quick running through the demo.
How does Microsoft Sentinel plan to adapt to emerging threats and security trends in the future?
Interesting. So I think from my current perspective, like I say, it's always an evolving product. Microsoft are keen for people to adopt this and take that on. People who work for partners, there were some incentives. I know those might have changed recently, but definitely it's a product that Microsoft see as one that they want to continue developing. So all I'd say is, as trends pop out, you'll probably see an equivalent tool or automation or KQL query to combat that. Hope that answers the question whilst being brief.
No, that's perfect. Yeah.
Cool. We've got, like I say, just in the nick of time, we've got an alert, so we can see here that the automation runbook hasn't kicked in. Oh well. I think I might have missed something. Oh no, sorry, I tell a lie. We've certainly at least got the entities. So when I was filling in my own entity mapping, this is what's exposed from that KQL query. So if you do write your own, please look at entities, because you can see that it's exposed the information for me to look at. We can see a timeline of when it was generated. 2254 doesn't seem right. That time's a bit off. But we can certainly dig into further things like the alert ID. It'll then trigger the KQL. We can hit run or not. Oh, it's all come falling down at the end. Have we got any more questions?
Yeah. Will we leave it there, or what do you think? And we'll get into the questions.
One more question. If we can squeeze one question in, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. Perfect. So, are there any certification programs or official courses for advanced learning in Microsoft Sentinel?
Yeah. So I'd look at the SC 200 learning path. That is the security analyst, I think it is called off the top of my head. That will focus purely on Defender Sentinel products. Obviously, you've got the SE 900, which is the fundamentals, which will kind of introduce you into that kind of process. And you could then choose to do the 200. Like I say, it really depends on your knowledge. But yeah, there is a learning path, and it's the SE 200 is the exam that you will look at onto taking at the end. Any more,
Perfect.
Sean?
I think that's all the questions. Yeah.
Well, what I'd ask then, I know we've got a minute. I'm going to flick back to the slide deck very, very, very quickly. Hopefully, we've covered everything that I've said that I wanted to cover with the objectives. From the log analytics workspace into Sentinel, into Logic Apps, but also what I'd like to ask the audience, this is something new for me. If you could scan the QR code and just give me some feedback on what your thoughts were. Timing's probably going to be one of them, but if anyone could do that, that'd be super useful for me personally. Just so I know if what to improve on next time.
Perfect. So on behalf of the ESBC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Ben, for taking the time today to carry this webinar. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again to you all for joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.